Welcome, everyone, to the Autoimmune Hour. I'm Sharon Saylor from SharonSaylor.com and UnderstandingAutoimmune.com, where you can find all of the previous episodes of this show. We're 450 plus counting over there, so hopefully you can find something that interests you, plus much more. And tonight, I'm so excited. I've got a really great return guest, a dear friend of mine. Recently, I got Linda Binn's really great newsletter, and it was all about a technique called grounding. And when I first learned this technique from her, it was so helpful. And I thought, we haven't talked about it. So I reached out to her, and she's graciously being on the show for us tonight. So welcome, Linda. Thanks for being on the show.
Thanks so much, Sharon. It's so great to be back here talking with you again.
Oh, absolutely. And I love your newsletter. I want everybody to go to lindabins.com. That's your website, right?
That's right.
Yeah,
Yes.
that's what I thought. We'll spell it out in the show notes, and sign up for her newsletter because it's really great. And let me quickly read her bio to you. She is a breakthrough energy specialist and teaches heart-centered professionals and business owners the skills they need. She's an accomplished energy coach and author of 7 self-help books, including the wonderful, which we're going to talk a little bit about tonight too, called Value Me: Advantages of Being a Highly Sensitive Professional, and numerous published articles. She has appeared on television, including her multiple encore guest appearances on Portland, Oregon's AM Northwest News Show, as well as on the radio, podcasts, and online summits. And so we're going to talk tonight about highly sensitive people, but I also want to talk about grounding. So first off, Linda, share what is a highly sensitive person?
It's important to address this because I know that when I first heard the term highly sensitive, it didn't resonate with me. I didn't think I was highly sensitive. It wasn't until I read Elaine Aron's book, The Highly Sensitive Person, that it really clicked. It made complete sense. And I find this often when I talk to people that just don't ever think of the word of themselves in terms of sensitivity. But I think it's really the more caring and heart-centered you are, the more likely you are to be highly sensitive. So what does that mean? It means that you think and you feel everything so much more deeply. So if you tend to overthink, if you analyze every situation, if you've been told you're too sensitive, if things people say or people do or situations, especially global events, for example, feel like they hurt you so deeply, they touch you so deeply, that's one of the hallmarks of high sensitivity. Obviously, there are degrees of it, but it's that feeling. We also have this tendency to pick up on other people's energy and emotions very easily, and not only pick up on them, but you can feel them. Overstimulation is another common trait of highly sensitive people. And you can understand that when you feel everything so much more deeply. So it can be easy to be overstimulated. So, for example, if you were in a crowd of people or if you were in a meeting with a lot of people, think of all that energy and that emotion that you can be picking up on. So you can easily become overstimulated. There's a tendency to feel emotions again very deeply. So you can become very sad. And it's not when something happens, like for example, for me, if I hear about animal abuse or cruelty to children, animals, anybody, really, it's not just uncomfortable. I don't just feel sad. It's like a punch in the gut. And it can really, if I'm not careful, it can really be debilitating. I can go down that path. And then the other aspect of high sensitivity is noticing subtleties, this awareness of subtleties that it seem very obvious to us that we're noticing something and you wonder why everybody else can't see it because it seems so obvious to you. And that can be as simple as something somebody says or something somebody doesn't say, or awareness of something that's happening in the environment. For me, I will hear like sounds or smells that I'm very sensitive to those. So there can be a truck backing up like a mile away with that beep beep sound, and I will hear that. And if I'm with other people, I can hear it very intensely. And if I say something, other people usually say, "Oh, I don't hear anything." So it's noticing things that other people don't notice. So if any of that resonates with you, there may be a chance that you're highly sensitive. And again, there are degrees of it. Not everybody is sensitive in the same way. Also, if anybody's ever told you you're too sensitive, that's a very common thing. So those are some of the main characteristics.
I like you when I first heard the term, I was a little, I don't know, put aback. Maybe insult's too strong a word, but I didn't like the term. It was like somehow in my mind, I'm not too sensitive because my youth and on. I was always told, pull yourself up. You're too sensitive about this, and you're too sensitive. Or, what's the problem? And all of those sorts of things. So I guess when I first heard the term myself, I took it. I didn't want to be it because in my mind it was like a negative label.
That's exactly right. The word sensitive has a very negative connotation to it. People, I think, imagine you're going to be bursting into tears at the slightest thing, that people think of it as being weak and fragile. In fact, the opposite is true. Highly sensitive people, it's a great strength. We're strong because we have to be. And I think with all the research that's been done over the past 20 years or so, and there's more and more research being done into this to show that it is a trait, it applies to, they estimate, I don't know, somewhere between 20 to 30% of the population. And what they've shown in the research is that our brains and our nervous systems are actually wired differently. I was listening to a presentation recently where they were talking about how the brains of highly sensitive people, more areas of the brain light up when we're doing tasks, and there's more connectivity. We're communicating with more parts of the brain. So it's not just a label of, oh, she's going to cry or be weak. It's an actual physical thing. And I think with this amount of research now, people are starting to see it for the strength that it is, just beginning to see it for that. But so we really need to reframe that word and see it as not as a weakness at all. The scientific term for it is sensory processing sensitivity, and they labeled that high sensitivity. You could call it high sensory. We have emotional intelligence now. So this could be seen as sensory intelligence. It's just a different way of being. It's a more deeper feeling and experiencing the world in a different way.
I completely agree with that. So many times now that I'm older, I'm not as surprised. It's okay when someone say, "Oh no, I don't see that," or "Where are you getting that from?" Or it was those sorts of things. To me, I don't take it as is what's wrong with me anymore. At first, when you're young, you think everybody has that ability,
Yes.
and I find that way even with highly sensitive people, where you don't know that other people don't experience the world that way because you're born this way.
People have this tendency to think that everybody sees and has the same experiences, and it just isn't true. It's really about accepting everybody and knowing that we are all unique, right? Yes, there is a term high sensitivity and it applies to a percentage of the population. But even within that, each highly sensitive person is unique. So I sometimes see articles where they'll say, oh, these are the traits of high sensitivity. And for example, a common one is where they'll say, oh, highly sensitive people don't like to watch violent movies or horror movies or anything like that. Now, for me, that is true. I don't like to watch those things, but I also know there are highly sensitive people who actually enjoy watching those things. So you can't make a blanket statement and say all highly sensitive people have this experience or feel this way. We are all unique within that, but we are wired differently and we experience the world differently and we see the world differently. It is important to be aware of it because if you're not aware of it, you can go down a path of really trying to, what a lot of people say is, can I switch this off? Because it's too much, it's too intense, and people look for ways to cope with it, to manage it. They look for ways that are not good for them. And so there's dimming down or dulling their senses to cope. And what they need to do is to learn what their sensitivities are and then how to make the most of those rather than wanting to shut it off. And I understand the desire to want to shut it off because sometimes there are things that I think gosh, life would be so much easier if I didn't experience this in this way. But it's about learning who you are and how to make the most of who you are and be the best that you can be, I think.
Oh, absolutely. And one of the things that I know in my recovery process from the autoimmune, and I hear it a lot from people that we've interviewed, is this idea of when we're seeking care, medical care, or some sort of professional care, having to stand up for ourselves and look, I know me best. And this idea of gaslighting, that's in your head, or that's not happening, or whatever. I get very frustrated at times. And that was one of the reasons I started the autoimmune hour was my frustration in getting medical professionals and the kind of care I knew I needed. And as a highly sensitive person, I knew certain things about me that were off of this, what I'll call the standard bell curve.
Oh, yeah, that is such an important point, Sharon, because I think most of us, when we have a health issue, we want someone to fix us. We want someone to say, here, take this or do this, and this is what it is. Take this and you'll be fine. And I certainly wanted that. But what I came to realize over the years is nobody could do that for me. I had to be the one to do that because just like you said, I would go to someone. I had insomnia issues for many years on and off. And I've been down the path of the sleep disorders and sleep studies and all those things. I've been to various doctors and practitioners, and they would all say, oh, yes, it's this, take this supplement, whatever it is, do this, and that'll fix it. Never, ever did. And what I came to realize for myself is that for me, it has a lot more to do with the gut than it does with stress or anxiety or overthinking or anything like that. And I've been told before when I've said something like that to a doctor, oh, that's nonsense. There's nothing to that. And as soon as I hear those words now, I know, okay, you're not the doctor for me. If you can't have a discussion with me about what I know I'm feeling and what I am experiencing, and then we can explore that, then you are not the doctor for me. Because I've learned that we have to take responsibility for ourselves. Yes, go and seek advice, go and learn as much as you can, but nobody knows what is right for you apart from you. And you have to, if you have a practitioner, you have to work together to find what's best for you. And I didn't like that in the beginning. I thought other people would have the answers for me. And I came to realize they didn't. And I also learned, and this is another common experience for highly sensitive people, is that if I do find someone and we're working together and I seem to be making progress, usually we get to a point where that doesn't work anymore. And so now I have to go on a different path and find something else, which can be very frustrating. But I've learned not to be frustrated with it anymore. I've learned to say, oh, okay, now it's time for me to explore something else. I understand the desire to just be fixed, but for highly sensitive people, especially, no, I think you have to give that up and take responsibility for yourself. And it's actually very empowering ultimately when you do that.
It just always seems for me as well, there's always another layer. I reach
Yes.
another height of my recovery and then, oh, here's another layer.
I thought I'd resolved that. Oh, here we are again.
Exactly. One of the things I totally agree that so much of this begins in the gut. There are many therapies I've done over my recovery and that focused on other items. And then when I started focusing on repairing the gut, it was and early in my discovery. I think gut was just becoming talked about a decade or
Mm,
so ago. And when I started focusing on my gut, I was surprised at how fast I would notice shifts in me and other things
yeah,
were began to repair themselves. Maybe not be ideal. Definitely, I could feel changes in my mood and my sleep patterns and all sorts of things that the original intent was maybe to stop a bellyache or something like that aligns. And I'm like, wow, I'm also noticing that my mood is better or whatever it
yes.
might be. And so definitely I agree with you finding professionals that can help you focus on your gut and nutrition and food sensitivities and all of that was critical
Well,
in doing this. But definitely don't take advice that doesn't feel right for you. I can't tell you how many times I've had people just tell me like, in so many words, not in this exact words, but this is how it landed. Like, is just shut up, stop being a problem, and do it.
yeah. I can remember when I first had sleep issues. No, I've been in the US for almost 30 years, moved here from England. So this started the year before I moved to the US. So we're talking like 30 years of this issue. Anyway, so I was having sleep problems, and I have always been more focused on a natural approach rather than turning to medical doctors. Of course, there are times when you need medical doctors, but I was persuaded. I allowed myself to be persuaded to go and find a doctor. Now, I was new in the country, so I didn't know anybody. So somebody recommended someone. And I went to see this doctor, and I told him about the sleep problems. And I asked him, what do you think is causing this? What do you think the root cause of this is? And he said, I'm going to give you a prescription. Just go and take this and come back and see me in 2 weeks, and we'll see what's changed. So I said, what is the prescription for? And he said, no, just trust me. Just go and take this, for 2 weeks and then come back. So I left, and I didn't know what the medication was. And this was before looking up on Google. So I went and got a nurse's dictionary and I looked up what the medication was, and it was an antidepressant. So I called his office and I said, why do you think I'm depressed? I said, if I am depressed, which I'm not, I said, it's because I'm not sleeping. So if you can address the sleep issue, then I wouldn't be depressed. I said, but he said, I just told you to trust me. He said, you've been looking into things. I said, of course I'm looking into things. Anyway, I didn't stay with that doctor and I didn't take the antidepressants because I knew that wasn't it. That whole approach of don't talk to me about it, just say, trust me and take this. No, no. And I'm glad I even knew even back then before I was more aware that was not the right approach.
Trusting ourselves and setting boundaries is sometimes hard for highly sensitive people. I know for myself, it's always an internal battle about trusting myself. I don't know if that has to do with being highly sensitive people, but the setting boundaries, I don't want to hurt other people's feelings in the process.
Yeah, it's because we care so much. And I don't know about you, but I've always been so more focused on other people probably than myself, and often to the detriment of myself. I would help others at the expense of myself. Been able to turn that around now because I know that in order to help other people, I have to be, I have to take care of myself first. But yeah, this fear is it's very common for highly sensitive people, women especially, because we don't want to upset anybody. And part of that, I think, is because we feel that upset, right? It's almost like we feel it before they even feel it. But yeah, we don't want to upset people. We don't want to be the cause of anyone else's discomfort or pain, and it's almost like we would rather take that on than subject someone else to that or be a contributor to that for someone else. But I learned this, you have to take care of yourself first, do the best that you can. And in that way, you are able to help other people so much more.
I'm just thinking about another level where in some of my coaching work, I talk about people who, want to raise their fees or something like that. They're barely getting by. And I think about this idea of if you're not feeding yourself, how can you help your clients? And so sometimes putting it in a more direct wording like that than very personalized, take care of yourself first, somehow seems hard for them to do. But then if they
Yeah.
realize if you're charging enough money and then if it bothers you, then find an appropriate NGO or charity or some sort of facet to take care of that bothering. But you've got to be
Right.
able to feed and house and clothe yourself first before you
Absolutely.
give to other people. And that sometimes taking it out of the realm of being very emotional or personal and very practical helps.
Yeah,
Oh, I see what you're saying. If I'm not feeding myself, how can I help anybody else?
exactly. Exactly. That's a really good way to put it. Yeah.
Now, I'm curious about a couple of things about highly sensitive people. This could be my own mind and overthinking it, but I've always found it fascinating that some part of my brain I don't know, let's say I'm watching a scary movie like you, I'm not a fan of those, but sometimes whatever. I get this thing in my head that, okay, don't be afraid. But then all of a sudden I have this weird thought like, yeah, but another part of your brain has to tell you, you got the fear, and another part of your brain is telling you, don't be afraid. It's like your brain is trying to do two opposite things at the same time.
I think that's is a very common thing for highly sensitive people. It's like our brains go into overdrive. It is. It's like there's two parts of us, and we're having this conversation with ourselves. It's like a little battle going on in there. I call it mental gymnastics. We're going through all of this in our brains in over anything, really. Because something as simple as watching a movie, if I'm invited to go somewhere, whether like a party or something like that, there's immediately this conversation that goes on. Oh, I don't really want to go to a party, but I don't want to let this person down. And there's all this stuff going on.
I've always found it interesting. It's the same brain trying to solve the paradox.
Yeah, it is. It is. But that is one of the commonalities of the trait is that we tend to overthink. And because we're looking at everything, it's that depth of processing again. It's that looking at everything from every angle and not only our own angle, but the angle of anybody else that's affected. So we're considering all of that very quickly, all of these thoughts coming, and it can get very overwhelming at times.
Absolutely. And one of the things we have to do is, speaking of time, is take a quick commercial break. And when we come back, we're going to talk to Linda some more about grounding and ways to settle those sorts of overthinkings, overstimulating things down to a point where we can function. I think sometimes I get so overwhelmed, I have to stop. And when I read your newsletter about all the different techniques, I was just going, check, that's a good one. Check, that's a good one. We'll talk about grounding in just a couple minutes. We'll be right back. Welcome back, everyone, to the Autoimmune Hour. I'm Sharon Saylor, and I have the wonderful Linda Binns here. She's a breakthrough energy specialist, as also a specialist in highly sensitive people. And in my experience of doing this show for about 8 years now or more, lose track, one of the things I found that a lot of people with autoimmune fall into the HSP, highly sensitive people category. And I've always been fascinated by that. We've got guests on before, like Sarah Payton and a whole slew of other people who talk about our processing and the neuroscience and the past traumas and all of that, and how that can play into well-being or not lack of well-being within our bodies. And so when I saw Linda's recent email and newsletter about grounding, I said, let's have her on. So, Linda, thanks for telling us what is HSP and how people with HSP operate. Now, I want to just check, is it something that we're born with, or is it something that we learn from early childhood, or a combination of both?
It can be a combination of both. I think primarily it's a genetic trait. I just was doing some research into this question recently. And what Elaine Aron says, who's who started the research in high sensitivity, is primarily it's a genetic trait. Now, our experiences during childhood can have a major contributing factor to that. So what she says is if you were, as a child, if you were maybe even just mildly sensitive, if you had a lot of trauma in your home environment, that can make you more sensitive. She also said, interestingly, that some people who are uh, born as sensitive people can have that drilled out of them and forced out of them, and they're forced to step out and be more assertive or be less sensitive. And I think I, my experience is when that happens, and I'm not a scientist, so I have no scientific backing for this. This has been my experience in working with people, is that you can, to a certain extent, push down the sensitivity and force yourself to fit in to what everyone else expects of you, to be like as much like everyone else as you can. You can shut it down. My experience has been you can do that to a point, and then you reach a point where you can't do that anymore. And that could be when your autoimmune things start coming up, that sense of denying who you really are. I do believe we all come to a point where we can't deny it anymore, and it will start to show itself in some way or other so that we have to accept it. But I think the answer is primarily it's a genetic trait, but there are other influencing factors to it.
I remember you mentioned that thing about going to a party, not going to a party, disappointing, not disappointing. And I'm thinking there are times when I've been able to push it down or put it in the background. That's exhausting.
It is so exhausting, and we have no idea really until afterwards just how exhausting that is. And what I've come to realize is that there's a great example of how we just give our energy and our power away. Instead of just being now, I can do it. I can just say to somebody, they invite me to their birthday party, whatever, and I can say, I really don't feel good in those kinds of environments. Let's go out and have lunch sometime so I can help you celebrate your birthday. That would be great. But I don't do well in that kind of environment. And I feel perfectly confident saying that now. And people are fine. They go, oh, okay, yeah, that would be lovely. I'd love to have lunch or whatever. Whereas before, I used to just go into this agony of trying to make a decision because I don't want to let the person down. And I don't want to go to the party because I know how I'm going to feel afterwards. It is exhausting, completely exhausting.
And I, like you, have found that my true friends are like, hey, that's a great idea.
Yeah.
Look, I would love to have
Yes,
lunch just with you or tea just with you.
exactly.
And that's so
Yeah,
much easier to understand. And
yeah,
even if you're saying I'm not HSP, but I'm thinking even from a health standpoint, sometimes
yes,
nowadays, I'd much prefer one-on-one than a great big party where I'm uncomfortable. But I
yeah.
digress there. Let's talk about grounding techniques and first off, describe what they are and what they're used for, and then we'll go into some of your more favorite ones.
Especially for highly sensitive people, as we've talked about, we can get overstimulated. There can be so much going on that we feel overwhelmed emotionally, physically, mentally. And so it's important to know what techniques you can use to calm that down, to ground yourself, because it can become just completely overwhelming. So knowing what works for you, because not everything works for everybody, know what works for you, and then make sure that you incorporate those things regularly and are definitely daily, at least have one thing at least that you can do to ground yourself. Maybe it's at the beginning of the day to ground yourself before you go into the day, or it's certainly at the end of the day when there's been a lot going on and you can just come back and just ground yourself. It feels centered. It's like coming back to yourself. It's a stabilizing, it's a resetting of your energy so that you can function at your best.
It was interesting that you bring that up about the morning routine, and this is not maybe it's a grounding technique too, but we had a sleep specialist on who talked about going out right after you get up, don't look at your phone, and get real sunlight on your face and your eyes and just step out into the sunlight, even if it's cloudy, he said it works. And just get some natural light on your body was a great centering technique. He said was a
Mm,
great way to wake your body up and get it prepared for the next night's sleep. And I had never thought about that, but
yeah.
understanding the natural cycles even sounded like this could possibly be a grounding technique as well.
Absolutely, it is. And natural cycles, nature, anything natural is naturally grounding. I'm very fortunate that where we live, our house backs onto woods. So in the morning, as soon as I open my curtains, I'm looking at trees, I'm looking at birds, I hear the bird song. My technique first thing in the morning, I am not a jump out of bed and go get ready person. I need time. I just sit in bed, I have my cup of tea, I'm looking at the trees, I'm listening to the birds. That is grounding for me. I start with my sort of intention for the day. What do I want to do today? Not just do. I'm a great doer, but I've had to learn how to be. How do I want to be today? How do I want to feel today? That has become more important than what am I going to do today? And that sets me up. That sets my energy up so that I can be at my best throughout the day. I think it's important to know what works for you. Now, some people are jump out of bed, go exercise. Maybe the exercise is their grounding. That's perfectly fine, whatever it is for you. And for some people, like I often talk to people who just love to write or who love to dance or who love to sing or love to play music. And sometimes what they'll say is, I just don't have time to fit that in. But if that is really what centers your energy and helps you feel good, then you need to find ways to, a few minutes to bring that into your day because it's that important to you. It could be anything else like writing or journaling is a centering and grounding technique that I use. I don't do it every day. Sometimes we hear, oh, you need to journal every day. You need to have your gratitude journal every day. I do express gratitude every day, at the beginning and the end of each day. I don't formally write that down in a journal. But there are times when I will use a journal, and those times are when my mind is in overdrive. If there's something I'm really thinking through a lot and I can't get any clarity about it, that's when I will use journaling because I find the writing of it brings clarity. Writing everything out brings clarity to me. So that's when I will use that for grounding. Some people might like to do that every single day. Some people might like to have a formal journaling process. So again, it's whatever it is for you. It can be exercise. It could be yoga, meditation, and make sure I incorporate that every single day. Some people will say you have to meditate first thing in the morning, get up earlier and meditate. I meditate in the middle of the day. That's the best time for me. Other people will say you need to do your exercise first thing in the morning. I prefer to do it late afternoon, early evening. That's the best time for me. And those are all great resetting, grounding techniques. But again, it's knowing what works for you and the best time for you. Just because somebody else does it at this time doesn't mean to say you have to do it then as well. So it's find what works for you and do that.
Oh, absolutely. I had someone come on the show recently and they were talking about they were told they had to meditate just constantly. And they said, every time I stop to meditate, it's traumatizing to them for some reason. I don't know. I'm not inside their body, but the way they were describing it was so the silence or whatever was traumatizing to them. And they came up with, okay, I don't have to beat myself up that I don't like to meditate. I'd rather listen to quiet music or something else and being able to call that their meditation time, even though they technically, like by the book, weren't meditating, but having that quiet time listening to something that gave them pleasure. Hey,
Yes.
works for you. Sounds good.
That is so important. Anytime you're experiencing frustration or resistance or thinking I'm doing it wrong, I'm not getting it right, then you have to find the way that works for you. So meditation is a great example. So many people say, oh, I can't meditate. It's not about just being quiet and not thinking. It's if thoughts come in, let them come in, notice them, let them go. You can always come back to, yes, the goal is no thought, but that's how often is that going to happen, especially for HSPs? Thoughts come in. Music, though, is a great way. I love to use music and I love there's some beautiful tracks. I use Insight Timer and they have some beautiful things on there. And I have one that I'm loving at the moment, which is like Tibetan bells. And it's just, I listen to that and that stops me thinking. I just listening to the music. It could be nature sounds of the ocean or birds or rain or something like that. That gives me a focus. But as I'm focusing on that, I'm not thinking. So that is meditation. So it doesn't have to be a certain way. Find the way that works for you. Give yourself permission to do that.
Absolutely. And I want to just point out and share your experience with the Insight Timer is an app. So
Yeah, yes. Sorry.
you can set different places or tones or musics and also a timer. The idea is to do it several times throughout the day for short periods of time, or you can set it for longer periods of time. But I just wanted people to know what Insight Timer was.
Yeah, and you can find different meditations. You can find guided meditations where somebody's talking you through something. You can find just music meditation, or you can find just sound. And you could find one for an hour. You could find one for 5 minutes. It's whatever works for you. And you can look through there, maybe find your favorites and listen to those over and over again. It is quite a useful tool if you find it difficult to just sit and meditate by yourself.
Absolutely. I wanted to circle back. I've talked about it on the show before with journaling. One of the things I love, I'm like you, I don't do it every single day. But one of the things I was taught years ago by a mentor was to always write on the right hand side the first time and then save the left hand page blank. And so the next time you can go back and reread and you're like, "Oh, I remember when I was doing that, and that was helpful," or, "Oh my goodness, I was really not doing great then, but now I'm doing great," and I can read and see what's changed, and always to put on
Yes.
the left-hand side, like the date, "Okay, it's been 6 months and this has changed." And I always found that helpful that I can go back and go, "Oh, okay, yeah, I was there and now I'm here." And it was always a way of going noticing the changes, the positive changes that were happening in me, or if sometimes I'll tattle on myself. I've been known to cheat with my diet. And, and, then I'll forget what I was doing that was making me feel so good back there. And I'm like, okay, I've slipped here. What was I doing that was so helpful? And then just going back and writing on today's date. Okay. Thank that page for reminding me, oh, when I was doing this, that was much more beneficial for how I was feeling than what I currently am choosing to do.
Yes. That's great that works so well for you. What helped me with that and how I discovered that it was there were gut issues that were affecting my sleep was I kept a sleep diary, not sleep diary, a food diary. And then in the notes, so I would put what I ate throughout the day. And then in the notes for in the next morning, I would put how well I'd slept. And one of the biggest thing I discovered was I have a challenge with digesting protein. And I discovered that whenever I had a large amount of protein in my meal in the evening, I just wouldn't fall asleep. And so I now know I have my protein more at lunchtime and I don't have it for dinner. And that's helped my sleep tremendously. I've never read anything about that. No doctors ever suggested that to me. So that's how I found that out. Now, as far as the journal that I'm writing on the right and saving the left, when I use a journal, and this is just me, but when I use a journal, I never want to go back and read what I've read.
Interesting.
Because for me, the process of writing it means I've worked through it, I'm done. I never want to look back to see where I was because I've always focused on moving forward. That's not to say it's wrong. If that helps you to do that, and it can be helpful to say, oh, yeah, this is what was happening and this is where I was. So it can be helpful to do that. But the point I want to make is there's no right or wrong way for you to do it. But as soon as I finish a book, a journal book, I tear it all up and throw it away. Some people will keep their journals. I think I've heard Oprah say she's kept all her journals and sometimes she will go back. I don't want to go back. That's me. So it's whatever works for you. I think it's about giving ourselves permission to find our way of doing it.
Absolutely. We've come to back a full circle from what it was just a few minutes ago, where you know you best.
Yes.
I always want people to understand it's nothing wrong with saying to anyone, hey, look, may work for you. I know me best. Doesn't work for me that way. It works this way. And I think
Yes.
that's where all the breakthroughs come through. I've never heard anybody about the protein at night. It makes sense. It's harder to
Yeah.
digest. It makes total sense.
Yeah. I had never heard of it either. And, that helped me to help the naturopath I was working with. I told her that. So now we had a new direction to go in for focusing on the gut and what that actually needed. I think really highlighted for me how I have to keep track of what does or doesn't work for me, just like you said you do, because nobody else can know that. I can remember I was having for quite a number of years, I had these what they call ocular migraines. I don't know if you've ever had those. It's where all of a sudden you'll start to get these wavy lines across your eye and it just gets more and more intense. And I thought initially, oh, maybe it's stress or maybe it's because I'm tired because there's a lack of sleep thing. And it would come and then it would go away. And then maybe a few months later, it would come and then go away. And so I've mentioned it to various people and nobody really ever knew it, did anything about it. And this one time I started doing some research about it. And for some reason I had trouble assimilating vitamins, B vitamins in particular. And B12, because I don't eat meat, B12 was something I had to take and my body was not utilizing it. So I had to take it in liquid form. And I don't know, for some reason I looked up B vitamins and ocular migraines and I found this research paper that linked low levels of B12 2 ocular migraines. And that's when I thought, oh, maybe I'm not absorbing the B12, so maybe I'll go to a liquid B12. So I started taking a liquid B12, ocular migraines. I've never had them since. And I even said this to my eye doctor at one time, and he said, "Oh, I've never heard of that." Well, I haven't heard of it either. But I found this research paper, and that was what it was for me. You have to take your health into your own hands and do your own research. Don't expect somebody to know what's going on for you.
Oh, absolutely. Or make assumptions. I think that's really important. And to find a healthcare professional, I have a team that
Yes.
supports that kind of walking together on your health, not being told, not a hierarchy, but you're walking
Yes.
together at the same level on your health and what's happening
Yes.
for you. And even for your family members, I know sometimes I have certain family members. I'm circling back to something that you said before the commercial break about sometimes people think we're more fragile than we are, and having to remind people, like, I'm not fragile. I always worry about somehow by osmosis or whatever my science of Sharon is going on here about when people label us that way. I don't want to get stuck in their label of how they view me, and I don't want to start viewing myself with their label either.
Now, if somebody says to me, "Oh, you're too sensitive," they don't really tend to say it to me anymore. They used to when I was growing up. But I would actually say, "Thank you." I would, I take that as a compliment. And actually, I believe there's no such thing as too sensitive. There are degrees of sensitivity. How can you be too sensitive? You are what you are. So if you say you're too sensitive, that means it's wrong. Stop being so sensitive. You can't. I am the way I am. I feel things the way I feel things. I do think, though, what I've come to realize also is that it is very hard for those people who are not highly sensitive to understand what it means to be highly sensitive. And therefore, sometimes we need to help them understand that. An example that I used to experience, if I went to a conference or something with lots of people, I would come away from that with a severe migraine. And it was really bad migraine, I think, for picking up all the energy and emotions from people. Now, what I used to do was I used to force myself to stay there even though I had the headache. And if people said, "Oh, let's go out for lunch," or a group of people, they invited me, I felt I had to go. Or if there was a group activity, I felt I had to go. I forced myself to do these things. And then when I learned about high sensitivity and all of that, I stopped doing that. And I found that as soon as if I was at a conference and I started to feel a headache coming on, I would simply say to people, "I'm just going to take a break for 5 minutes. Just feeling a little overwhelmed here. I'm going to take a break for 5 minutes. I'll be right back." Nobody questioned it. Nobody cared. It just helped them understand. And sometimes I might say to somebody, "No, I don't really want to do that. There's a little too much energy going on for me right now. I just need some quiet time," or something like that. And nobody argues. Nobody says you shouldn't do that. Everybody just seems to appreciate me just saying what I need. And I think we need to do more of that. Not that we have to go around telling everybody all the time, but where appropriate, we have to be able to articulate what our needs are. If I go for a blood draw or something like that, I've always, since a very small child, had I have a very physical reaction to needles, any needle being stuck into me. As a child, I can remember going to the doctor's office and they would want to put a needle in me. And I would say to the nurse, I would probably pass out. And the nurse would usually say to me, "Oh, don't be so stupid. Just don't look at it." And it doesn't matter whether I look at it or not. This is a physical thing. I feel it in my body and then I will go. And so now, whenever I go for anything like that, I just ask, "Can I lie down, please?" Because if I don't, you have to pick me up off the floor. And everybody's perfectly fine. They say, "Oh, yes, of course." And they take me somewhere where I can lie down. And I still get the reaction, but I'm not going to pass out because I'm lying down. And then it's over. It's just a much easier process. And I have found most of the time people really appreciate when you articulate what it is that you need for yourself.
Absolutely, and I can just see the liability, especially in it's either I'm upright and I pass out on you, or we just take take care of
Yeah,
it right now and just go
yeah.
on.
I used to get really embarrassed about it and feel really bad that happened to me. I felt bad for the other person having to deal with me, put it that way. But now I have found that the nurses or the doctors, wherever, just appreciate me telling them that. And then they usually, some of them will say to me, "Oh, yeah, I hate needles as well." They're the ones doing it. But it just makes the whole process so much easier for everybody. So I don't think we should be afraid of saying what it is that we need, even if we feel slightly silly about it. I don't feel silly about it anymore, but I certainly used to.
Oh, I couldn't agree more, just saying what you need and leaving it that. You don't have to have explanations or anything else. It's just, "This is what I need in this moment," and then take
Yes,
care of yourself, and the rest will take care of themselves as well. People saying, "But I've got this and I've got that," and here again, if you're not taking care of yourself
Mm.
first, nothing else is gonna get done. We're
That's
down
right.
to just about the last 4 minutes, Linda. Time flies when I get to chat with you.
Yes.
What final thoughts, what questions haven't I asked that you would love the audience to know? And then tell us where we can get your book too.
I think what I want the audience to know more than anything is you might not resonate with the term highly sensitive. If you have an autoimmune issue, I would speculate that you probably have a degree of sensitivity. So just try to reframe your thinking about what the word sensitive means. It is a great strength. You might not feel strong, especially if you're struggling with a health issue, but there are many aspects to high sensitivity that are a great strength. And so I would encourage you to learn as much as you can about it. But most importantly, can't emphasize this enough, is trust yourself. Whatever you feel is right for you is right for you. Don't let anybody else tell you you're wrong. This is what you should be doing. If it feels right to you, then it is right to you. Biggest lesson I ever learned was trust myself.
Thank you for
Oh,
sharing that. Me too. Trust myself was
yeah,
one of the best lessons I ever learned, and being
yeah,
able to speak up for myself.
yes. And then to get the book, Value Me, Benefits of Being a Highly Sensitive Professional, it's on Amazon. And I've been doing a weekly live stream about high sensitivity and diving into the highly sensitive experience. You can watch that on YouTube. You can watch it on my Facebook business page. You can watch it on LinkedIn, wherever you are. But you just go to my website, lindabins.com, and you will find just about everything you need there. You can reach out to me through there as well. I'd love to hear from anybody.
Thank you, Linda. And I want to spell her name. It's traditional Linda, Linda, and Bins is BINNS.com. And that'll
Yes.
also be up over at understandingautoimmune.com in the show notes as well. If you're doing something and you don't have a pen or pencil to remember it by. But luckily, Linda, it's a pretty simple name.
Yeah, it should be
And
easy.
it's spelled just like it sounds too, so that's the
Yes.
wonderful thing about that, and I do love your book. I encourage everyone to go over there and get it because it's about understanding ourselves and being able to really thrive in the
Yeah.
world, even if we're with this highly sensitive personality.
Yes.
And so everyone, that's Linda Binns. Thank you so much, my dear, for being on the show. Really appreciate having you back. I know it's been far too long since we talked about the topic, and the topic of grounding really struck with me. So
Yes.
everyone, have a great week. Whatever your adventures, join me next week for another brand new episode. Enjoy.
The information provided on the Autoimmune Hour, Understanding Autoimmune, and Life Interrupted Radio, including the websites understandingautoimmune.com and lifeinterruptedradio.com, plus social media, is for educational purposes only. What you read, hear, and see on the Autoimmune Hour, Understanding Autoimmune, and Life Interrupted Radio, and its websites, and other media outlets is based on experience only. The information should never be used for any legal, diagnostic, or treatment purposes.